So I'm well acquainted with how people in your industry work hard and play even harder. So I'm excited that you're all hanging out with me here on Friday. It's a real pleasure. As Tove kindly introduced, I wrote a book called Manage Your Money Like a Bleeping Grown-Up. And today we're going to talk about money, which is a weird thing to talk about, but especially right now, when it feels like everything's up in the air. We know that South Africans are incredibly financially stressed, and we know that our own spending habits have suddenly gotten much weirder than they used to be. I know that my budget at the moment has mostly turned into a budget that goes towards sourdough bread making equipment and plants and other very strange things to keep me bored in my house. But I also think this is the perfect time to be talking about money, because while a lot of our habits have been put on pause, it's actually a really great opportunity to reassess how we spend and what our relationship with money is like in our personal lives. So it's actually, I think, the best possible time to be talking about this topic. I first wanted to just give you a little bit of background about how I ended up doing the work that I do and how I ended up so passionate about talking to people about money. And the first thing that you need to know about me is that I'm very much not a financial advisor. In fact, the fact that I ended up writing a book about money is still incredibly surprising to me, because I spent most of my life incredibly confused about how money worked. In fact, so I come from one of those families where growing up, you could talk about anything around the dinner table. You could talk about sex, you could talk about politics, religion, anything you wanted. Nothing was taboo except money. We never spoke about money. So when I grew up and I got my first job in my 20s, my entire financial strategy, my whole plan was never think about it, it'll be fine. And the problem was that turned out to be a really terrible financial plan for me. And it's a financial plan that it got me to the point where I ended up hundreds of thousands of rands in debt. And the thing about being so deep in debt is that money starts to control every decision that you make in your life. And it's really boring to have a life that is controlled by money. So that was the moment where I realized that this strategy of never thinking about money and hoping it will be fine was really not serving me. And I needed to put on my big girl panties and actually learn how money works. What are the rules of money? And how can I get myself into a position where I'm the boss of my money? It's not the thing making the decisions for me. And I did that, funnily enough, by sneaking my way into working for the financial services industry. Which, you know, I had a dad in the business. I could finagle my way in. And it really felt like going into the belly of the beast and learning actually what are these rules that people know who work in the industry. And along the way, when I went and I did this and I spent time working for a lot of banks, a lot of investment companies, I realized something that was, well, I realized a bunch of things that really were very surprising to me. And the things that I've become really passionate about sharing. The first really crazy thing that I learned had to do with this very huge number that you can see over here. 358 billion, 359 million and some change. That very huge number, if you can believe it, is the amount of money that South Africans spent on gambling in 2018. 11 something, exactly. So that's just gambling. The number below, 26 billion, that is the amount of profit that the gambling industry declared in the same year. And that's just legal gambling. So that excludes kind of a whole bunch of the dodgier things that, you know, we've all got some dodgy uncle who tries to get you into weird gambling rings. Excludes all of that. That's just legal gambling. So that is, Suma can help with that number. So this was the first really life-changing thing that I learned when I really started taking money seriously and trying to figure out how it worked, was when I was walking around in life feeling like I had missed a class in school one day. I was the one person who had no idea actually what the stock market was or the JSE, and I was too embarrassed to ask by this point. And I was clearly the only kippy wandering around with no idea what was going on. That actually wasn't true. It turns out that most South Africans, even most South Africans in the middle class, really have very low levels of financial literacy. And I think that's not our fault as individuals. Our schooling system is really, really, really bad at equipping young people with the real skills that we need to know. I spent 5 years reading different Shakespeare plays in high school, but I don't remember ever being taught how taxes are actually calculated and when you're supposed to submit a tax return. So this was the first thing that I learned, was it wasn't just me and it was okay. And the other thing that was really exciting that I learned is that it's actually not that complicated, because we all really have a lot more choices with money than we think we do. My best way to illustrate that is I want to give you an example of a young woman. I like to imagine her in my head as someone called Cindy, because I have a friend named Cindy who I like. And I want you to just think about someone like Cindy. I want you to imagine that Cindy starts work when she's 25. Let's say she had a couple of internships and stuff before then, but her first real job, she's 25. Her salary is 10,000 Rand a month. So not huge, but a very sort of normal middle class South African salary, right? And I want you to imagine that every year she gets a 6% increase. So South African inflation is usually around 5 or 6%. So she just sort of gets an inflation increase every year. And she works from age 25 to 65, and she never takes a break during that time. Now, if you can imagine, if you actually go and do the math on how much money someone like Cindy will earn over her lifetime, it's 19 million Rand, even from a starting salary base of 10,000 Rand a month. So this is the first thing that I felt really empowered by when I started learning about money, is actually all of us are going to earn a lot more money in our lifetimes than we probably think we are. If you want to work this out for yourself, here's a rough table that will give you an estimate. So if you take at the top row the salary that is the most similar to the salary that you earn normally, if you average it out with bonuses and stuff, and you take on the left, on the red number, the number that is the closest number to your age, that number, if you go and match those two, that is the amount of money that you are still going to earn over the rest of your lifetime, with the same assumptions as like retiring at 65. And those numbers are all very big numbers, right? I hope that those numbers are bigger than we normally think they are. And I like to really just sit and picture what that amount of money can look like. If I imagine it as a big like pile of gold coins that I could swim through. Because the thing is that every Rand that you earn over your lifetime really is a piece of possibility. Because the thing about money is that you can do anything with it. You could use it to fund a big dream that you have, or you could use it to, I don't know, make the tushes around the corner from your house a little bit richer, whatever your poison is, right? All of those pieces of money are choices. And there is a lot of money that is going to flow into your life over your lifetime that you make choices about what to do with. And it's kind of a big responsibility. But the flip side of this is there will be a lot of money that you will get to choose about, but you don't have a lot of time to make those choices, really. This is the shadow side. Because that same person who works from age 25 to age 65, if you take that as 40 years, that only translates into 480 paychecks, which means 480 different moments to really decide what you are going to fund with all of that possibility money. And the thing about how money works is the first few of those paychecks really can be the most powerful. So it's really important that we are conscious about money, that we are making these choices deliberately. We're not just letting money be a thing that kind of happens in the background of our life, because we don't have that many chances to make those decisions. It means that it's really important we understand, we have a good plan for our money. We know that we're putting it to use. And this is tough because most of the general wisdom that we get about money is nonsense, I'm afraid. It certainly was for me. So what I'm going to do with the next 45 minutes is I'm going to take you through 5 specific myths that I heard in my 20s about money that turned out, upon closer inspection, to be absolute nonsense. So we're going to talk about 5 things that I wish I'd known differently. And myth number 1, this is especially for you, Gordon. Get rich, write a book. Lol. Yeah, that's a myth. No, that was just a note to self. The first myth is that all of this is future me's problem. Now, when I was young and I had my first couple of jobs, I wasn't earning that much money. And my attitude to money was, it's fine that I'm sort of just getting by hand to mouth right now, because when I'm older, I'll be earning more money. And that's when I can start saving. That's when I will start thinking about retirement. That's when I'll start thinking about all of these other things. I don't have any money to manage right now. It's fine. Future me's problem. Here's why, unfortunately, that is not true. It's not true because Edward Cullen. Bit of a segue, but follow me here, right? Now, I'm sure that each and every single one of you are huge fans of the Twilight movies. I can tell, right? All seen them many times. And I'm sure that you've all noticed that in vampire movies and vampire stories in general, the vampires are always loaded. They're always very rich. They live in mansions, they have the fancy body glitter and the cute waistcoats and the whole shebang, right? And have you ever stopped to think about why that is? Why are vampires always rich? Does anyone want to have a guess in the chats? Time. Yes, exactly. You're financial people. So this won't come as a surprise to you. The answer is because they are immortal, right? And compound interest. And good looks. Exactly. Good looks are truly the secret to life. And a great way to illustrate the power of time and compound interest is for me to give you an example about vampires. So I think we all know what compound interest is, right? We understand if you have interest on your interest as well, that gets you to an exponential curve and your money can grow extremely large, right? But the thing that it took me a long time to really internalize about compound interest is that far more than how much you have saved and how much you have invested, what matters when money is compounding in that way is how long you can leave it for. That matters far more than any other single variable. So let me give you an example. If Edward Cullen 200 years ago had gone to Capitec Bank and he had deposited 200 Rand into a Capitec savings account, okay? Capitec didn't exist 200 years ago, neither did the Rand, actually, but let's just say for the sake of arguments. So he put it in a Capitec account, earning 6% interest, and he left it there for 200 years. Do you have any idea what his bank balance would be today? So just in your own head, all ask yourself that question. What does 200 Rand compound to over 200 years? Because the answer might surprise you. It is 1 billion Rand. That is how much 200 Rand turns into over that amount of time. And this is the thing about compound interest, is that time really matters more than anything else. So I'm sure that some of you have seen this graph before, or a graph like this, but this is the thing that I didn't properly internalize until much later than I had hoped. And this is a graph that compares someone who starts saving for retirement at age 25 and age 30. So the black line is someone who saves 1,000 Rand a month from age 25 to 30 and then stops, never saves another cent, leaves it in an investment that compounds at 7% every year, which is the long-term average of South African equities above inflation. And at the end of that time, by the time she retires at age 65, that person has about 1.3 million Rand. Compare that to someone who starts just 5 years later and does exactly the same thing. So from age 30 to 35, they save 1,000 Rand a month for 5 years, and then they stop. They never save another cent in their lives. it feels like that extra 5 years doesn't matter very much, but it turns out that it matters by almost R1,000,000. That starting just 5 years later has an enormous effect because of how that money could have compounded. So this is the reason that I'm so passionate specifically in talking to young people about how important it is to start understanding money from your first job. So I hope that those of you who have kids, this is a conversation that you're starting to have with them, even though they don't want to have this conversation. Because the best possible thing that you can do is wherever you are in your income journey, is to make sure that one of the first things you prioritize is your really long-term investments, which means your retirement savings. Because this is not future use problem, unfortunately. This is very much current use problem. Why can I not click through? Okay, which brings me to myth number 2, which is the only single piece of financial advice I ever got from my parents is you got to get on the property ladder. It's the only thing that matters. As soon as you can, get on the property ladder. Property is the safest investment, the best investment, the only investment. Got to just buy a house as soon as you can. It's so important. Okay, now I want to talk about one flaw in this plan, which is which really can best be illustrated through a board game that I used to play when I was very young. It was a board game called Monopoly. And when I was growing up, we had the old version. And I'm not sure who here will remember this old version of South African Monopoly, but you know, there's the different streets and they have different values. But the most expensive street on the South African board was a little street called Elof Street. And I don't know if any of you have recently been to Elof Street, but it is in Hillbrow, and it is very much no longer the most expensive street in South Africa. This is the big problem with investing in property in general, is that buying a house is probably the single least diversified asset that you can buy. It is the classic example of taking all of your eggs and putting them in one big basket and hoping that it works out. The thing is, it often does. Many people make a great profit buying property, but on average, as many people actually have not and have made a huge loss, especially compared to other types of investments that they could have made. And the problem with this as well is that, sorry, I'm actually going to skip these, and it was supposed to skip, but it's not presenting properly. Never mind. The thing about the South African housing market is that if you look at how it's actually performed over the last 20 years, for most people, it's actually been a really terribly performing investment. So the blue line over here is the house price index, which shows what is the growth in the house prices for sort of middle income homes, personal homes. So this excludes investing in commercial property and other types of property that you can invest in, which I'll talk about in a second. So you'll see that on average, that has grown sort of at a not very exciting sort of 3.5% for a very long time. And what's even worse is if you look at the filled in part, that shows you how house prices have grown against inflation. And the problem is that for a lot of the last decade, house prices haven't even kept up with inflation. So you actually would have lost money, the average person. There are, of course, exceptions, but the average person has lost money against inflation in their house. There was a great boom time a while ago, and there could be boom times again in the future. But historically, housing has actually really not been a really good investment. Now, this doesn't mean that it isn't a good idea to buy a house, though. It just means that a lot of middle-class South Africans think of their house as their retirement savings vehicle, their main vehicle for saving for retirement. And they hope that one day they will be able to sell their house for a huge profit and use that profit to fund a retirement. And the thing that I just want to spread the news about is that that is an incredibly risky strategy that, if you look at the averages, has not paid off for most people, right? So buying a house can still be a great idea, but you need to have an additional retirement savings plan on top of your house, because the chances are it's not going to be enough. It's not even going to keep up with inflation. Buying a house is still a great idea though, but it's a great idea because of cost saving. Now, we all know this idea of it's better to be putting money into your own asset than your landlord's mortgage. And that is true, right? It is better, you have to pay housing costs one way or another. It is better if at the end of 20 years, you at least own that asset and you've been able to fix its price a little bit. You haven't had to pay more and more every month with rental increases. But the thing about South Africa is that buying and selling houses is actually much more expensive here than in many parts of the world. The transaction fees and the estate duty and that kind of thing is really, really high. And because of that, if you run the math, on average, you have to stay in one house that you live in for 9 years before it was cheaper to buy that house than it would have been to rent it. So buying a house is really a great idea, but only if it's a place that you're committed to being for quite a while, which means that for most people, it's a great idea to start thinking about when you're more settled, when you are thinking about starting a family, you're pretty committed to, okay, this is where I know I want to be for a long time. And then it is a really, really great tool to control your costs and also to have a home. That is a really important emotional thing for many people. There's this really cool calculator online. If you go and Google the Alpha Vantage rent versus buy calculator, if you are still renting and you're not sure if you should be prioritizing buying a house or not, or if you're feeling bad that you're falling behind for not having bought a house, go and look at this calculator. And what you'll find is that for many people, sort of in their 20s and 30s especially, it can be a good idea to actually wait quite a while before buying a house, especially if you're still at a stage in your career where you might still want to move for the next while. So that's a little thing. So yeah, buying a house can be a really great thing, but it's not the obviously amazing investment idea that certainly grown-ups made it seem like it was when I was young and starting out in my financial life. Okay, myth number 3. Which is, okay, so if my house is not going to be the thing probably that is going to pay for my life when I'm old and in my old age, what are my alternatives? And I definitely had, Isabel was just asking me to repeat that calculator's name. If you Google Alpha Vantage buy versus rents, it's also on my website, which I will give the link to you at the end of this. Yeah, and we can also talk about alternative ways to invest in housing in our Q&A if you want to afterwards. Talk about REITs. Anyway, okay, but, thank you, Nico, perfect. Okay, so then if housing is not going to be the thing, your own house that you live in is probably not going to be the thing that gets you through your retirement. What are your alternatives, right? I always had the perception that investing was something that people did who like owned yachts and lived in Stellenbosch on a wine farm. And I don't know, it was not for people like me. It was for people like them, people who listen to the business news, which I'm not that kind of person. The first thing that it's really useful to know is that we all have to invest our money. We really do. And the reason is that not investing your money is a surefire, 100% guaranteed way to make your money vanish in time. And the reason is inflation. It's that every year that you are not investing your money, if you're just putting it under your mattress or you're keeping it in cash or some cash equivalent vehicle like a savings account, that money is worth less and less and less and less every single year. So we have to invest our money. The other thing is that if we're not investing our money, and if we don't do that for a long period over our lifetime, we're giving up on so much free money that we might have had from compound interest that would have made it much more possible to finance our retirement than it would otherwise have been. One of the great things about the modern world is all of us are likely to live much longer than generations before us did. But the scary flip side of this is that for many of us, we are going to be retired for almost as long as the working career before the age 65 that our parents would have had as their working career. So the idea of just working from 25 to 65 and then potentially living until you're 90 and financing that off 5 or 10% savings over our working career, if you look at how unlikely and difficult that is for most people, it means that we are really facing a retirement savings disaster that is going to affect all of us. And the best way that we can fight that is by using the leverage of compound interest, which means getting our head around other ways to invest and investing strategically from as early as we can. So that's the thing. So I found the world of investing very alienating when I was younger. So now I make a real point of trying to explain the stock market to people in as simple way as I possibly can, right? So the stock market sounds like an incredibly complicated thing. Really what it is it is a marketplace where people buy and sell pieces of the biggest businesses in the world. And it's really that simple. Any of the brands that you buy in your day-to-day life, like I'm obsessed with Steers and the Wacky Wednesday, and it is the thing I have missed the most since leaving South Africa. And I swear to God, I would have spent probably thousands of rands a year buying Steers Wacky Wednesday burgers. And then the amazing moments, the light bulb moment that I had at some point about investing was I could rather have been buying pieces of Steers, the business, for the same amount that I was buying. The beautiful thing about the investing landscape in South Africa is it has opened up so much in the last couple of years. There are new apps and platforms like Easy Equities, like Outvest, like, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about Outvest to you lot. It might be a sensitive one. But there are a number of really, really easy platforms that make it easy for anyone to buy and sell pieces of businesses. And they have almost no minimum. So you can start investing literally with 20 Rand, which again is a wonderful way to start engaging kids in your life with how easy it is to invest. Go and buy them 20 Rand worth of their favorite clothing brand for their birthday if they're a teenager. They'll actually hate that. Never mind. Forget I mentioned that. Your kids would be so disappointed. But it really is easier than it's ever been to start buying businesses. The thing with building up an asset, building up a portfolio, is to just think about it as building up assets in your life. Assets are really an important concept to internalize as well, because we talk about a bunch of things in our life as being things we invest in or assets. We talk about our car as being an asset. We talk about, and in some ways it is, but the kind of asset that is the most important for us to think about are things that will put money into your bank account over your lifetime. And the question that we just all need to be asking ourselves all the time is, am I buying enough assets that will one day work for me so that I don't have to work, or in times when I cannot work? The way that I like to think of this in my head is I like to imagine that I have a group of pets that I call snorgels, and they look like these little weird frog things. Just, I don't know why, I just do. And I like to imagine that my snorgels need to eat apples, and one snorgel needs 1 apple per day to survive. And to keep my snorgels alive, which are my expenses, I have to go out to my neighbor's apple farm every day, and I have to go and do the hard work of picking apples, which is very boring and awful. The thing that you need to start doing is just make sure that you start to build up a bit of an apple surplus. You can do that either by having a side hustle. You can do that by saving any bonuses that you get, any of that kind of spare money in your life. Or you can do that by reducing your expenses. Shoot one of the snorgels in the head. Weakest snorgel's gotta go. Sorry, snorgel. And then, hey, you've got extra apples. The act of keeping that surplus, making sure that there is a gap between the money coming into your life and the money going out of your life, that's what I think of as saving. And investing for me is, what do you do with that cash that you have now, you've extracted? And investing is the question of, how can I take my cash and turn it into something that is the equivalent of an apple tree? It is something that will start to produce things that will, it'll start to produce cash for me over my lifetime. And that simple lens can be a really great way to sense check the big purchases in your life. Buying a rental property it's very clear how that is an apple tree. That's something that's going to put apples in your world that you can feed your snorkels. Buying a fancy car is not ever going to put cash into your wallet. It is only ever going to take cash out of your wallet, unless it's like a classic car and you're a trader or something. So we've all got to be building up assets. Over the long run, no other type of asset class has performed as well as shares. So while the stock market sounds incredibly complicated, just come back to this thing that all it is buying pieces of big businesses, and nothing has done better. So and we have a long history of this as well. So over from 1900 to 2019, which is a long time, South African equities grew 7% above inflation on average. Had a slightly better period between 2000 and 2016. I don't have the most recent data. Obviously, this year it had a bit of a wobble, but to everyone's kind of bemusement, it has already mostly recovered. Actually, it had a massive dip, but it is almost back up to where it was. And this is the thing about the stock market, is it can be terrifying because it's very volatile. And what that means is that the value of the things that you own on paper, their paper value, wiggles around all over the place madly. And if you look at it too much, it can cause sleepless nights. But the thing is that over the long run, almost always historically, it has ended up much higher than where it started and higher than any other type of asset class. And these wiggles often kind of sort themselves out within quite a short period of time. So here's a table that shows you the best and worst periods ever in the stock market. I haven't put 2020 on, but I don't think 2020 is even going to make it onto the top 3 worst years. But you know, the year is young. Let me not tempt fate. Okay, but so this is showing you the best and worst years of the S&P 500. All the S&P 500 is it's an index of the 500 biggest companies in America. That's all it is. The worst year the S&P 500 ever had was the year 1931, where in 1 year it lost 43% of its value, which is like imagining half of everything you own vanishing in 1 year is very stressful. But the thing is that the best year that the S&P 500 ever had was 2 years later, in the year 1933, when it went up by nearly 54%. And this is the thing, is if you look, the longer a time period you look at, the less likely it is that you will lose money in the stock market. If, and there's a big asterisk here, if you are diversifying, which I'll get to in a second. And this is the thing about investing in the stock market. You never want to put money in shares that you want within the next year or within the next 2 or 3 or 4 years even, that you definitely need to spend. And that's because the market could be in one of its down wiggles when you need to withdraw the money. It's very much a long-term space. So as a general rule of thumb, my thing for myself is that if it's money that I can wait 5 years for or more, it goes almost entirely into shares. And anything between that I need to spend within this year should stay in cash. And in the middle, you kind of want to just mix those things up in kind of blended funds. And again, all of these really cool new platforms where you can buy and sell shares, this one I think is Outfest, but all of them have this kind of thing. They'll help guide you now and show you, like, this is a 1 to 3 year type investment. This is a 3 to 6 year type investment. And that's what it means, is it means what is the degree of really wobbly type of assets, the mix of wobbly assets versus more stable assets. But the thing is that we have to put our money into some pretty wobbly things, because otherwise we are not going to have a chance of beating inflation. So we have to take on some of that risk, even though it's a bit scary. Okay, but here's the problem. Say you're like, okay, cool, I want to start buying shares. What shares should I buy? Let me go and look at shares. And you go and you look, and it turns out there are 5 million different funds in South Africa. And it's very overwhelming and very confusing and very stressful. What should you do? Well, it turns out that fundamentally there are 2 main ways of buying shares. You can do so actively or you can do so passively. Now, active investing is where you have a fund manager who's really trying to bet on winners and losers. When you are betting on winners and losers, especially if you're doing this as an individual, you really can lose all of your money, because you might have bought shares in Steinhoff. You might have bought shares in a company that has failed entirely. Companies fail all the time. Fund managers are usually pretty good at picking really diversified, very mixed baskets of things, but it's still a very expensive process, because there's someone who's having to do all of that work of trying to figure out who the winners are and who the losers are. There's a different way to invest, which is passive investing. And this is where you buy an index fund. So you've probably heard of the JSE Top 40. That just means an index of the 40 biggest companies on the South African Stock Exchange, right? The S&P 500 is another one of these. There's a lot of them. There are even indexes now that are one product that let you buy shares all over the world in one easy product. And essentially, with buying one thing that you can start buying into for 20 Rand again, you're essentially buying a tiny, 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 tiny piece of every listed company in every country in the world. And the great thing about doing that is that it is so much safer, because the chances are of one company or one country having a really bad couple of years and losing a lot of money, that can absolutely happen. The chances of every country in the world having a global pandemic and all having a financial disaster at the same time, clearly it can happen, but it is very much rarer. And the other beautiful thing about passive investing is, because you're not having to pay for someone to do all of that research work, it's a lot cheaper. Not only for you as the end consumer kind of thinking about who you're paying, but in the fees that get built into the products. And you are people who work with financial products, and you know how much fees matter when you're building those business models. And it turns out that if you look at history, those passive funds, those easy funds, actually outperform the active funds, the more kind of strategic, guessy ones, 83% of the time. 83% of the time, it's better to have just bought the really cheapest chips, super easy index fund. You come out on top. So it's a great place for most people to start, is buying a really, really simple index tracker. And what it means, if you are looking at an index tracker, there are lots of them. There are lots and lots of different products that essentially all let you buy the top 40 or let you buy the S&P 500, which means that you can kind of take these really complicated documents they call fund fact sheets, and sorry, my Zoom is not working because I'm not in presentation mode, and you can essentially just look at the fee and find the cheapest one. And fees in investing really do matter a lot over the long term. And this is something that I encourage you all to look at in your own pension or provident funds as well, by the way. Fees on investment products in these kinds of funds tend to range from sort of 1% all the way up to sort of 4%. And I have seen some that go as high as 6 or 7%, which is profoundly bananas. They might not sound like big amounts of money, huge percentages. But the thing is, if you think about the fact that the stock market on average only grows 7% above inflation, a 4% fee is half of your growth. And if you think about what that can compound to over your entire working lifetime, an extra fee of an extra 1 or 2% could translate into several millions of Rand at the end of the day that is going to a financial advisor with an Audi rather than to you in your old age. So please do optimize for fees when it comes to especially your retirement products. It's incredibly important. Candace Sutherland is asking my thoughts on crypto. I have a rule with myself, which is that I let myself spend 5% of or hold 5% of my overall portfolio in speculative investments. Speculative investments for me are things that are gambles, and it's money that I know it's okay if I lose that money. And crypto for me is in that basket. I started buying crypto a very long time ago. It's done well for me. I'm very pleased that I invested in crypto back when I did. I keep selling it down though. I keep selling, I make sure that it doesn't go above 5%, because the thing is, there are 100 and something years of the stock market. There's a much longer history of business existing. I know that businesses are going to keep existing. I don't know that crypto, any one specific crypto, is going to necessarily be worth a lot of money in a couple of years. It's a gamble. So I definitely don't think it should be the first thing that people start investing in. I think that it's a great thing to put your play money into, and it can be quite fun, but please take care of the other more important things first. Okay. Cool. I'm gonna not get too drawn into questions. I'll come back to questions now, but I do love taking questions, so keep popping questions there. So I have a piece of homework for you, which is that if you guys are all, you work in the finance space, so I am sure that many of you already are very comfortable and very confident investors. But if you are not, if you are someone who has never bought a share, I have a piece of homework for you, which is to go to one of these websites, pick one. I personally use Easy Equities because I like their interface, but a lot of them are really, really good. And I want you to go and buy 50 Rand worth of any share. It doesn't matter what. Pick a brand that you like. If you like Mr. Price, buy 50 bucks worth of Mr. Price. Doesn't matter. I want you to just experience how quick and how easy it is to become an investor, and to shift in your head from being only a consumer to someone who's an investor, who has an ownership and stake in businesses in this country. It's very thrilling, and you literally can do it for 50 Rand. All of us, even in COVID times, can do that. So please go and start investing with 50 bucks, even if that is what you want to do. Here are 4 index funds that you could start off with if you wanted to. These are all really low fee, low cost, really easy funds that are very diversified. Satrix has one called the MSCI World, which is one of those funds that lets you buy into everything. And Easy Equities also lets you invest to actually turn your money into dollars and actually take it offshore, which is also kind of fun. The Ashburton 1200 is another one of those global ones. It's 1,200 companies around the world. But anyway, I don't care what you invest in. Go and buy some. I'm going to skip past this one because we're running out of time. I'm just going to go super quick through myth number 4, which is resisting the urge to think of debt as free money, or rather to think of credit as free money. There are 10 million South Africans who are more than 3 months behind on their debt repayments. 10 million. That is half of all credit active South Africans. We have an absolute debt emergency in this country. And I saw in my own family people's lives being ruined by debt, by irresponsible lenders who got them. I've heard stories in my own family of people who told my family members to lie about their income and expenses when applying for debt, so that they ended up taking out more debt than they could afford to pay back, and get into these debt cycles, get hounded by debt collectors. It is devastating. And I'm sure that all of you have seen someone in your lives go through this. The reality is that in a country like ours, where unemployment is so high, where people have so much financial pressure on them, it makes absolute sense. And I don't think that we've done a good enough job at protecting people from really expensive debt. And part of what we need to do, I think, is change how we talk about debt and talk about credit, and just talk about it more. The thing about debt, especially in South Africa, is it really isn't a situation of people have been buying expensive things they can't afford because they're frivolous. Most of the debt, the consumer debt in our country, really comes from emergencies. And this is part of why what you do is so really, really important. But if you look at all of the studies about debt in our country, what it is it's situations where you got your snorgels and one day your income dries up. You do not have enough apples to feed your snorgels. You have to go and borrow. You have to go and borrow from your dodgy neighbor, who in my imagination I think of as Myrta. She's evil. And Myrta, in my imagination, will give you apples. You have to pay them back later. There's a little IOU. But that's not the problem. The problem with debt is not the fact that you have to pay the money back at some point. If that was all that debt was, that would be fine. The problem is the cost of debt, which is interest. It's the fact that Myrta makes you adopt her pet and feed it as well. And her pet is a thing called the interest monster. The problem with the interest monster is that it eats a lot of apples and it grows and it grows and grows. And the longer you keep it, the more it compounds. Exactly like investments compound, interest can grow and grow until it gets to the point where, for many South Africans, 60, 70, 80% of every paycheck is spoken for before they get it, just on their interest repayments. And that is a debt spiral. And that is where things get really, really scary. The thing about debt that I just really want to impress on everyone is when you're assessing whether debt is a good idea, look at its cost, not the kind of immediate, this is what I will have to repay every month. Look at the lifetime cost of debt always when thinking about if it's a good idea. During COVID, a lot of people approached me talking about how their income had dried up and they didn't know what to do. And they were being offered a lot of, by their debtors, which was really helpful and was a lifeline for many people, the option of extending their debt repayment terms. And they wanted to know, is this a good idea? I could probably keep paying it, but I'm a bit stretched. Should I accept this longer period? The thing is, if you look at all of those things, as a general rule, the longer it takes to pay back debts, the more it ends up costing you overall. So you do sometimes need to take those bargains. But always with debt, don't get distracted by the monthly repayments. Look at the lifetime cost. People do really get bamboozled here, especially when it comes to buying cars. This is a little example. Sorry, it's a little bit blurry. But it shows the ultimate lifetime of what it would cost you to buy a 120,000 Rand car, either at the top by paying it off over 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, or the worst, paying it off over 6 years with a 20% balloon payment. Those things are the devil. And that can essentially double the price of something. And this gets so much worse when you start looking at really high interest debts like payday loans. Yeah, cars are evil. I will say though, I am queen of the don't buy cars fan club. Cars are a money bonfire. Right now, if you do need to buy a car though, it's a great time to be buying second-hand cars in South Africa. Why? Because the tourism industry is collapsing. And therefore a whole bunch of car rental companies have started selling their fleets. So the market right now in South Africa is flooded with really cheap, high quality secondhand cars. Never buy a new car. That is one of my really passionate points. They can honestly lose 50% of their value in the first year. But secondhand cars, if you do need to own a car, and by secondhand, it's a great idea to buy a car that's like a year or two old that has an impeccable service history. And right now, the market is flooded with them. Little side note, if you were thinking of buying a car. So that was myth 3, debt is free money. And I'm just going to skip ahead to talking about the last myth, just to wrap this all up, which is the thing that always ultimately felt really scary for me about money was that it felt like this world where there was so much detail and there was so much I needed to understand. And I needed to understand stocks and bonds and options and forex and leverage and all of these really complicated concepts. And I needed to find the right products, and I needed to wrap my head around the whole finance industry and how the finance industry works. The thing that I learned that I really took away is that 90% of, I wish I could play this for you. This guy kicks the ball and then it hits the corner of the slide and then it bounces back and hits him in the head. It's very funny, just believe me. The thing about money and being good with money is that 99% of it is actually about psychology, and it's about learning to understand yourself, not learning to understand the finance industry. It's a lot like the idea of getting fit or deciding you want to run the comrades. It's not complicated to run a marathon. it's not like you need to understand really difficult science that you don't know what you need to do to get fit enough to run the comrades. It's just really hard. But what makes it hard is having the discipline to put on your running shoes and go and run every day until you're fit enough that you can run a marathon. And it turns out that getting in control of your money is very much the same. There really are only a couple of really fundamental ideas that we need to understand. We need to understand what assets are and why they're so important. We need to understand how powerful compound interest is. And we need to understand basically that investing in like really good long-term diversified assets is a good idea. But that's kind of it, right? You kind of almost know from right now everything you need to know. The hard thing is putting it into action and deciding what are the things that you are going to do in your life to free up those apples so that you can go and plant and invest them. And the thing about this that I find a really great place to start is not to treat your brain like you're a computer and you just need to tell your brain, this is what I'm going to do. And then the brain is going to do that. Because at the end of the day, we're primates and we are just these tiny little things that are not designed to resist temptation. We were designed to find other monkeys in the jungle to get not socially distanced with. That's what our brains were designed for, not for resisting all of the things that advertisers put in front of us. This is why budgeting doesn't work. This is why the approach of writing down a list and saying, okay, I'm not going to spend any more money on sushi or takeouts or whatever, just doesn't work, because that's not what we are like. Instead, you've got to find ways to trick your brain and automate the process so that you're not having to expend your willpower. Some great ways to do that are, one, pay yourself first. Make your savings automatic. That's what that means, by the way, not as 20-year-old me thought. It meant you should buy yourself a gift every month. That was what I told myself. It means making a deal with yourself that you will save 100% of any bonuses or windfalls or gifts, because that was money that you were going to live without anyway. That's really great money to say all of that goes straight into savings. It's also, these little tricks, like I have 2 different bank accounts. I am very much an adult woman, but I still pay myself a salary, a pocket money every month, basically. And so I have a separate bank account that I call my fuck around fund, excuse my language, and a different bank account that I call my grown-up money. And I put money that is for splurging and silly things in my plain money fund. And that is the only bank card that I take shopping, because I don't have any self-control. And the beautiful thing about these systems is I don't need to have self-control. I've put guardrails in place to make sure that I am doing the things that I know are most important for my financial future. And I can't trip myself up, which is good. You just got to be kind to yourself and your own silly brain. And a lot of this comes down to knowing why any of this matters to you. The thing about money is that money is important to different people for different reasons. For some people, money is about status. It's about respect. For other people, money is about security. My friend Georgina always says this thing. She says, life is a shit sandwich, and the more bread you have, the less shit you have to eat. I think that always resonates in my head. Money is a great insulator from the problems of the world. And it really helps you sleep at night, knowing that if bad things happen to you or to the people that you love, you are not vulnerable in the same way as someone without savings. For some people, money is about generosity. They want to give their families lives that they never had. They want to be able to solve the problems in the world. And for other people, money is about independence. It's about, as it was for me, wanting to feel like I could make decisions about my career, about my job, about what I did and where I lived, based on what did I want to do, not what did I have to do because I was so scared of the debt collectors and I really needed to pay my bills. Whatever it is, you've got to find this reason for you, because all of that money that's going to come into your life over your lifetime, it's a limited pile, even though it's a really big pile. So at the end of the day, you can do anything with it, but you can't do everything. So it really is important to know what matters to you and know what dreams of yours are most important to fund, and make sure that you set these systems in place that it can happen. and it doesn't just go in and out of your bank account. So just the last thing to leave you with, what are some very quick actions by Nico that you can take today that you, well, not today, it's a Friday afternoon, you guys must go get drink. Go get drink. But what are some really quick, easy things you can do on Monday to change where you're going on this journey? The first thing is, so this is my website. That is the URL. I won't read it because it has that dirty word. There is a flowchart on it, which you can download, that has a suggested list of steps, basically. And the first couple of steps are not things that have anything to do with financial products. They're steps around figuring out where your money is actually going today, getting the information, working out what some goals are that you have financially. What are some things that matter to you? Again, it's starting with the feels. It turns out that the feels are the hard part. One of the first things that I suggest everyone does always is there's this free app, completely free, called 20-7, that you can connect your bank accounts to and your investments and anything else that you have, your credit cards, anything like that. And it will automatically sort all of your spending into these categories, and it will show you actually how much do you really spend on everything in your life. It like automatically makes a budget for you. It can be a difficult emotional process to see the truth in black and white of, oh goodness, I didn't realize I was buying that many Wacky Wednesdays. But it's a really powerful first step, because there's that thing you can't manage what you can't measure. So those are a couple of quick things that you can do tomorrow. But whatever it is that you decide to do, I hope that it enables you to focus more on the things that you really want in your life. That's it. I know it's now 4 o'clock on a Friday. I'm sure many of you have to run. If you need to pop out here, it's been a real pleasure chatting to you. Bye-bye, but I will also stay online for another half an hour if you guys want to ask questions.